it's been a great journey.
I mean, I know you're sitting. I know where you are. I think you're at Boekenhoutskloof. I can see the wall of wine behind you. For those of you who've not been to Marc's tasting room, it's very Marc. You know, there's lots of stuff about Liverpool Football Club. There's the wall of wine. There's lots of Tintin stuff. Sort of cartoons. It's an amazing place. So I think we'd all like to be there with you in a way, but we can't be. So we're going to do this online instead. And thanks for everybody's patience. We'll move on to the wines now. And first wine we'll do. Will be the Semillon. Before we do that, I'd just like you to tell us quickly an overview of the 18 vintage. 18 vintage was the first year you made wine in your new cellar, didn't you? And the new cellar is one of the most beautiful and technically advanced. It's low tech in some ways, but I think that it's a beautiful cellar. Tell us about the difference that the cellar made, but then just a little overview of the 18 vintage for people who don't know about it.
Well, 18 was the third of the devastating drought vintages. You know, we kind of 15 was probably the most celebrated Cape vintage in about 40 years, and then the drought arrived, so 16 was an awful vintage. Very little rainfall in winter leading up to the vintage. Relatively good set, but very low yields, and then a lot of stress. 17, again, a drought vintage, and all that happened is we kind of got used to the conditions. We were better equipped and made better wines. And again, the same thing happened in 18. So the third of those drought years, which are well documented, and I think managed our canopies better, lower fruit yields. And just managed everything from irrigation, scheduling, whatever, to be better equipped for these very, very harsh conditions. And yes, it was the first year with our new underground facility. Godfrey Mocker joined me as cellar master in 2015, a guy I've been trying to get across for many, many years. And we put this new facility in place. And really, over a few years, I'd been stealing with my eyes, and you've kind of been along with me on my journey from the start, Tim. You know, it was never had lots of cash, and kind of, I don't want to say hand to mouth, but we struggled along, and as the business made a little bit of money, we could invest a bit more. And so it was a big step for us. It's not, we've never been a kind of...
In some ways, the chocolate block helped to build the cellar, right? Did it? Could you say that?
In more ways than one, more than what you know. Yeah. So,
okay, let's do the first one, which is a Semillon. I mean, you were making old vine Semillon before it was famous. I think the first one was 97, wasn't it?
Correct.
And this is actually a Franschhoek block, isn't it? So tell us a little bit about. I mean, Semillon, I always think is a massively underrated grape variety, not just in South Africa, but in Chile and in Argentina. It was a very widely planted grape in the New World in the 19th century, and even at the start of the 20th. You know, I think it was one of the most planted grapes, certainly in South Africa in the 19th century. You know, green grape. You know, so it was a bit generic in a sense. But a lot of these old vine parcels have survived, and this is a good example, isn't it? This is 2 parcels, isn't it? Overall 3, isn't it?
Same vintage the same vineyard that I worked on, have been working with since 97. It's the oldest Semillon block in the valley, dating back to 1902. And actually the same grower that I get the Cabernet from, Francois Malherbe, lower down in the valley. And this old Semillon block dating back to 1902 is right next to the Franschhoek River. I famously got shat on by one of our other vignerons members. I once said to a journalist that, you know, that soil, those alluvial sands should only be fit for potato planting. Anyway, it turned out to be, and he published that, and it's turned out to be this real iconic site. And yes, and then 2 other older vineyards, one dating back to 36 and one from 42. And then the first vintages were all Semillon. You know, my favorite white wine in the world is white Pessac or white Grave. I love the wines, and obviously Semillon inherently very, very low in acidity. And I realized early on, as Boekenhoutskloof as a property, through all our brands, we don't acidify any wine or must. I realized that we needed to add something. So logically, I added Sauvignon Blanc to the blend for many, many years. And then in 2014, we discovered an old block of Muscat in Franschhoek, incidentally, also dating back to 1902. and we subsequently replaced the Sauvignon component with this old vine Muscat. Obviously, Muscat, as Semillon is innocuous, Muscat is full of aromatics, and we didn't want those Muscat aromatics, so we pick it really early just to give the wine a freshness and a bit more structure. And if there's one recipe wine that I do in the winery, it's almost from day one been the Semillon. I built a cold facility for it, so once we do the fermentation, mostly in barrique, after fermentation, drop the temperature down to 5 degrees. I want to inhibit mallow. I leave it for a year, and then assemble the wine, and then into the bottle. And normally we keep it back more than a year before release. So 3 parcels of Semillon, but what has changed?
So one is La Colline as well, which is another famous Semillon vineyard.
Exactly. Yeah, all these raiders from outside of the valley have come and plundered our old vine Semillon. So obviously Chris Arlight, Thorn and Daughters, all getting some Semillon here in the valley, which is fine. There's enough to go around. But interestingly, that block has actually mutated over a period to what largely today is Semillon Gris. But then we a lot of the stuff today is fermented in eggs. The Muscat component, we actually a whole bunch ferment in amphora. Yeah, so just mixing it up. But all this, other than the Muscat, the same vineyards that I've been working with for many, many years.
It's interesting that some of these old Semillon vineyards, you walk through them, and I've seen some with Rosa Kruger, who's a famous viticultural consultant, really. And you can see that even within the same vine, you get Semillon Blanc, as it were, and Semillon Gris, on the same trunk, as it were. I mean, it's a very unstable grape in the sense that it mutates very easily in the vineyard, doesn't it?
Yeah, and as you correctly say, I mean, 60 years ago, Semillon was the basis for many of the large innocuous white blends coming out of the cooperatives, so it was widely planted, and sadly a lot of that's been pulled up. But you find these interesting parcels, and a lot of this mutation. I mean, Andrea Molyneux, she makes a wine just from the Gris, where they select the Gris, and she does that for the guild. So, and there's a lot of interest in Semillon.
A couple of things about this wine. I mean, one, I'm tasting it. I'm not going to tell everybody what it tastes like because you can do that yourself. But the acidity, is not the acidity of a hot vintage. It doesn't feel like a drought wine. It's got lovely freshness. And also, even though the Muscat d'Alexandrie is a small percentage, once you know it's there, you can see it. And I think even if you were tasting this wine blind, you'd say, there's something in this that I can't quite put my finger on. And I think that's the Muscat. And you're a very talented winemaker and blender, but I think that's one of your lovely little touches, that you're just adding something which is kind of almost sub-threshold. But the one, once you notice it, you say, oh, okay, I can see that. And I really like what it does to the wine.
Yeah, and also a big change in our winemaking. You mentioned the new cellar, but was also bringing Godfrey in. Godfrey, like Rudiger, incredible technicians, and they really support my rather laissez-faire style of winemaking. Never been very technical or analytical, and so together with Godfrey, and he's really honed this wine in on what it is today. It's become, I think, a better wine with a bit of Godfrey's kind of technical prowess. And interesting, Boekenhoutskloof has obviously always been regarded as a sort of Syrah and Syrah-based wine producer, but this is the wine that, particularly in markets like the got great support from a lot of the Soms, and we give them access to older vintages and things. And this is the wine that's really waving the flag for us at the moment.
Well, I mean,
for the first time in 25 years.
The other thing, I've been lucky enough to taste some older ones with you, and it does age really well. Semillon ages brilliantly because it's got good acid. This wine, it's a comparatively neutral grape, Semillon, when it's young, and yet it takes on all of these characters. I think with age, that if you can, if any of you watching going to buy some of this wine, the more you can afford to hold it back, almost the better it will be.
Yeah, Semillon, it relies on those secondary characteristics. When we start getting very much like Riesling, I guess the evolution brings on some terpenols. We get this waxy lanolin complexity, honeyed nuttiness. As I say, the marker for us has very much been White Pessac, the reference, rather than say a more Antipodean style or Hunter Semillon. So
okay, yeah.
But what has happened, I've also had to kind of move along with the times, and I'm bringing it a little bit earlier to get a bit more of that acidity.
Yeah, because as you said, you don't adjust anything in the cellar.
No. Sometimes at my peril, but
4.2 pH. You're not making those anymore.
You've mentioned that already.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen. Let's move on to the Cabernet, and we've got two contrasting Cabernets here. The first is Stellenbosch, and the second is Franschhoek. I think what we should do is do them in that order. Yeah. So tell us about the Stellenbosch. Now this has got 5% Cab Franc, isn't it? Another little Mark Gottfried touch. Where do you get the grapes from for this? Because this is again a sort of pan Stellenbosch blend in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, so Tim, obviously we only ever had one Cabernet. It was our Franschhoek Cabernet. I mentioned that was the first wine that I made in 1996, and small volumes locally with our Platter Guide over a period has been the most awarded red wine in the country, and there was always huge demand. And with our acquisition in 2010 of the historic Helderberg winery in Stellenbosch, decided that it would be time to introduce a Stellenbosch Cabernet to our range, purely because we simply didn't have enough of the Franschhoek. And as you all know, the Helderberg is to Stellenbosch what the Medoc is to Bordeaux. It's Cabernet country. And we worked with 4 sites on the Helderberg over a period of time until we thought that it was time to release a wine. So from the 2014 vintage in 2016, we released the first of our Stellenbosch Cabernets and deliberately tried to make it quite differently. I mean, obviously there's a regional difference, but whereas for many years the Franschhoek Cabernet, 100% New York with a long élevage, we decided with this wine to take a more traditional Bordeaux or claret-like approach. Lesser time in oak with a component of used wood, and the Franschhoek Cabernet, we add a bit of Cabernet Franc for exactly the same reasons that we add the Muscat or earlier the Sauvignon to the Semillon. It's really just to boost the freshness. The Cab Franc just really livens the wine up, gives it obviously a bit of a herbaceous touch and some nice aromatics, but primarily it's there to bolster the acidity.
And this is Helderberg, but there's also a bit of flora, isn't there? And Proeverij.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those sort of decomposed granitic slopes up near Cordoba. There's a few sites up there. And as I say, we worked with it a few years. The wines were then going into one of our other brands, and then decided in 2014 from the 2014 vintage to bottle, which incidentally was a lesser Cape vintage, but it's a wine that showed particularly well. And this is actually a bit of a Boekenhoutskloof thing we've worked out over time because of our no acidification regime and things like that. We tend to perform in lesser vintages because inherently those lesser vintages yield higher acidities, because why are they lesser vintages? You have ripening issues. So it kind of works in inverse for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting talking about the Helderberg, because the Helderberg is a pretty imposing mountain, but there are different spots within it, aren't there? I mean, basically, the closer you are to Force Bay, not just on the ocean side, but certainly on the end of the Helderberg, as you're talking about, where Cordoba is, and close to Fora, and closer to Force Bay, it's much cooler. So it's interesting, that you're blending. You're not just taking one block on the Helderberg, you're actually blending different bits of it and different bits from within Stellenbosch as well, to create this balance and the complexity of the wine.
Yeah, I think, Tim, that's been kind of from day one a Boekenhoutskloof thing. When I got going in the mid-90s, it really was, the estate concept was still alive and well. And we got a lot of criticism with our early success that none of the fruit was from our own vineyards and whatever. And I just said, we kind of said, we're not going to limit ourselves to the bounds of the property. Let's go and find the best sites around wherever they are. And it's exactly what we've done in Helderberg, just worked with some great parcels and blending. And I think that's what our team do particularly well. I've got a great team, 7 enologists in the team in total. We all blend together, we taste regularly together. I mean, all these bottles behind us is the kind of references. I think, like we say, you can't make great wine if you know what great wine tastes like. And it's become always been a very important part of our business, is our ability to blend.
Yeah, I mean, Cabernet is most of the highest priced wines in South Africa are Cabernet or Cabernet-based blends, particularly from Stellenbosch. Is that changing? I mean, we're going to talk about the Syrah in a minute. I just wonder, is Syrah coming up and Mediterranean red blends coming up? Cab Franc? I mean, are other things going to challenge the dominance of Cabernet as this perception of being the great red grape of South Africa?
I think obviously Swartland's become fashionable, and obviously the work that Eben and Adi and Chris and all those guys have done for the region. But we can't forget the history. And if you look, firstly, I mean, what do I buy every year at South Africa? I still buy Lariche Cabernet for my own cellar. Talima, I love Giles's wines, or the wines that Rudy's making. So I think there's always a place. I think what Stellenbosch is doing well now is kind of reinventing itself and saying, hey, taking a position with Cabernet, essentially what the Swartland did with Syrah and Syrah-based blends. Stellenbosch is saying, hey, come back to us. We're making really world-class Cabernets. And it was a natural progression for us with our acquisition in Helderberg to put this wine together. And it's in many cases now outperforming the Franschhoek, but for different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, just before we finish with it, just to say, I think the next stage almost is for people to differentiate within Stellenbosch, maybe not just between the Simonsberg and the Helderberg, maybe, but also, to put in Fora or, Proeverij or Devon Valley or Stellenbosch Kloof, or all these areas, and people will start saying, okay, these have got individual characteristics. I mean, I know this is a blend of the whole region or bits of it, but I think that will help as well, really, to take maybe South Africa's top red Bordeaux blends to the next level. I don't know what you think.
Yeah. I think obviously people like Proeverij with his MR, with Inver, already doing that. Mike with his Villefontaine wines, taking Cabernet and Bordeaux varieties to another level. But I think all those sub-wards within Stellenbosch bring different things, but this is essentially a Helderberg wine.
A Helderberg wine, yeah.
Mark,
okay, let's move on to the Franschhoek, which is, you said, is a
Tim, hold on, Tim. There's one question from one of the guests. Can you please explain what the Oxoline 2 system exactly does to the Cabernet?
Mark.
Yeah, well, Oxoline, really, we brought in the first generation Oxoline in, I think it was about 2000 or 2001. Oxoline's a barrel racking system, which I saw for the first time my friend Thibaut d'Espagne in the Entre-deux-Mains in Bordeaux using for his Giralat wine. It's a system that enables you to rotate the barrels and essentially put the barrels in place for their productive lifespan. So we brought it in initially for our Journeyman project, where we de-stem by hand and ferment in barrique and then roll the barrels instead of pumping them over. But today it's really just a tool for us to age our wines better, more uniformly. Once they finish mellow, we put them at sort of 45 degrees, so the bung's covered, and enabled us to work the barrels better and manage the barrels better. It's a prohibitively expensive system, but really it's all about barrel management and getting consistency.
Yeah. Okay, does that answer your question, Monique?
Thank you for the excellent question. Shall we move on to the Franschhoek? Now, we've heard now that this was your original wine, and this is, I think, about 30% of your own vines you use here. You're buying some grapes as well, aren't you, for this wine?
Well, it was always Francois Malherbe's vineyard further down in the valley, but as that vine's aged, the production has plummeted. And some of the early Cabernet that I planted in 95 and 96 on Boekenhoutskloof has kind of worked its way into the blend. Yeah. We still, the core of the wine is that original vineyard. And alongside that is our Cabernet Franc from Boekenhoutskloof. Cab Franc, without doubt, the variety most suited to Boekenhoutskloof. Yeah. So we've got, in fact, all the nonsense that I planted 25 years ago that, we've replanted largely to Cabernet Franc.
And I always think it's interesting on this wine, it's got 80% new wood, but I don't notice the wood. I mean, obviously you notice it a bit, but it doesn't dominate the wine. Just tell us a little bit about extraction, how you extract tannin and how you marry tannin, fruit power and acidity with wood. I mean, it's all French oak, I know. Are you using different coopers? Tell us about toast levels. I know you like food a lot as well, then increasingly you're going towards food.
Yeah, so Tim, as everybody's probably established, I'm not a particularly good farmer. When everybody was sort of sitting on the hills smoking their two bladders, say, "Hey man, the wine's made in the vineyard," I kind of embarrassed that I was a useless farmer and relied on others. So cellar and technology, we brought in the first triage table into South Africa. We actually piloted the first ViniClean, the global rollout for ViniClean was with us, and then the Palanque system. So we've only ever used peristaltic pumps. All these kind of details have been quite important to me, as has our relationship with our coopers. And from day one, about 70% of our wood is supplied by a relatively small cooperage called Sylvan. And we have a great relationship with them. Jean-Luc visits me annually, and the traceability is incredible. We work mainly with the wood from the kind of eastern part of France, the Allier and Vosges. So more about spice and aromatic, which I think is consistent with the style that we look for. But I work very closely with them in terms of getting similar wood, similar seasoning. We've only ever used Chateau Barrique and their reserved levels. Toasting has always been moderate to light, but long élevage. The Franschhoek Cabernet before Godfrey joined used to be 27 months in 100% new wood. But it's always been about the temperature. You know, at lower temperatures, the oak extraction over the élevage is a lot more subtle, a lot more gentle, and better integrated. So, and that's what our new cellars brought to us too. You know, straight after Mellow, we drop the temperature and we just leave the wine. Little topping regimes. We hate opening barrels. We leave the wines with no sulfur until the first racking. Used to be on an egg white. From the Wolf Trap through Chocolate Block through all our Boekenhoutskloof wines, we always only find with natural free-range egg whites. In January this year, I made a decision that we're going vegan across the range. So now no more eggs. We're using a potato-based product. We've done extensive trials, and the finding has been fantastic. So yeah, it's all these little increments that I think make up a great wine. You know, obviously the vineyard is the overriding factor, but I've never sort of said, "Hey man, you know, this is my thing."
Just tell us about the soils, because we said that the Stellenbosch is mostly decomposed granite. Here we've got a little bit of the stuff that's only good for potatoes. These sort of riverbank soils, really. Are they like gravel soils or sand or what?
Yeah, it's gravelly. This is across the road, actually, right next to La Motte. There's also a bit of decomposed granite. There's some sandstone, and then the stuff on Boekenhoutskloof. There's actually quite a lot of clay in the subsoil. So different sites, and again, blending. It's what we like to think we do well. Yeah. But you can notice in the style, if you compare the two wines, the Stellenbosch obviously a lot more plush. We think for earlier consumption, where the Franschhoek wine, Franschhoek significantly cooler, obviously as a region. There's a lot more austerity, and this is the wine of the two that I normally think benefits from some aging.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you were making a Bordeaux comparison, I'm not saying we have to, but it seems obligatory these days, but you know, maybe the Helderberg is more Pauillac or Saint-Julien or something, and the Franschhoek is more of a Margaux style. I mean, I always think it's more perfumed and delicate. I mean, I take your point about it needing more élevage and the acidity levels are higher, but there's a sort of finesse to the tannins for me in the Franschhoek wine that is delightful. You know, I like this wine very much.
Yeah, and it was interesting in a time where it was all of, you know, in the mid 90s to late 90s, it was all about these Stellenbosch cabs, and to really do something out of Franschhoek and wave a flag a bit for Franschhoek with Cabernet. It's been a while, and I love still working with this old vineyard. It's in real decline now, so we have replanted part of it on Francois Malherbe's property, but it's been a great vineyard to work with. but with the old issues, a bit of virus and some dead arms. Yeah, it's now being replaced. Yeah.
Just tell us a little bit about virus, because I think people watching may have heard about it, particularly with leaf roll virus, which seems to affect, in particular, late ripening varieties, of which Cabernet Sauvignon is one. Just tell us how you deal with it. Is it one of the things you just learn to live with, or are there steps you can take to mitigate its effects?
I think, Tim, we were often quite naive in believing that, in such a warm climate country like South Africa, that it was advantageous because it inhibited sugar and hence alcohol. But obviously there were related problems, changed the profile of the wine, and I think the wines tended not to age as well. And then you mentioned Rosa Kruger earlier. Rosa, when she was leaving the Rupert employ, we were first clients, and she came to. She really changed the way that we thought about vineyards and how we behaved, and she's largely guided us in our selection of newer sites and assisted our growers in replanting. But there's no doubt that the only option is eventual replanting.
With virus-free material, and then you have to protect the material, don't you, with predators and all sorts of stuff, really. Exactly,
but the work that Russa is doing with Vititech and these guys, the plant material is better than ever. The cleaned up clones, it's well documented.
Yeah.
But viticulture in South Africa has improved significantly.
I think it's been as big a transformation as what's happened in the cellars. I mean, people tend to focus on the cellars and obviously what's happened there, but I think the work in the vineyard, in the last decade, really, I mean, partly thanks to people like Rosa, but not only, Jaco Engelbrecht and other people, has been transformational. And that, it's a cliche, but you can't make great wine without great grapes. We all know that. I think that the raw material, if you like, has improved dramatically in South Africa.
Yes, there is that, but also the work that Rosa and Andre have done with the Old Vine project and that, and they're really putting the emphasis where it belongs fairly, in the vineyards. And I think that's been good. And in a lot of ways, South Africa's kind of in its own, finding its own groove and kind of leading the way in the way it talks vineyard and celebrates vineyards and celebrating viticulturists for the first time, which I think is important.
Well, like François Mallet, that we're talking about here. The one thing we didn't say was that the Semillon, I think, could qualify for Old Vine status, couldn't it?
Well, absolutely.
Certificate, heritage seal, yeah?
The youngest vineyard of the three is 1942, so right. They all...
That definitely qualifies.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody watching, it's worth having a look at the Old Vine Project website, just to have a look at the work they're doing. Not only in keeping old vines in the ground, but also in promoting old vines or wines from old vineyards and sort of taking them out of the co-ops or getting the co-ops to vinify them separately, which I think is a big challenge because a lot of these old vineyards just used to go into generic blends where people didn't actually pay them any attention. I think that's been a crucial part of the Old Vine Project success, really.
Yeah, and it's only gaining momentum. And for the first time, people are not saying, "Hey, there's more money in cherries or pomegranates or blueberries." They're actually saying, "Hey, let's hold on to these vineyards." I think that's important. They're a national asset.
Yeah. Let's move on to the Syrah. We've heard that the first one, that amazing, legendary wine. Have you got any bit left, by the way, the 97?
From time to time it sort of comes back on auction and I buy up whatever I can. We've probably got about 24, 25 bottles. Yeah.
Okay. And still drinking well?
Beautifully, yeah.
Never opened one for me.
I never drink our wine, so yeah. It's,
Anyway, so it's no longer from that site in Somerset West, which is now Adult World. Now we're 100% Swartland, aren't we? So divided between Porcelainberg and Goldmine. Just tell us about these two sites, how you blend them and why they're different, because they're very different sites, aren't they?
Yeah, so I mean, Porcelainberg obviously relatively quickly gained a reputation of its own. Kelly Lowe farms both properties, but Goldmine is sort of on the same mountain range, so to speak, but right on the other side of Riebeck Castile, next to the Mullenhoop home farm called Roundstone, we're their direct neighbor. So two very different sites. Obviously, Kelly with this blue schist right on top of the very arid sort of hilltop or mountaintop very, very extreme viticulture. And Cully there is between 80 and 90 hectares now, some of the best Syrah in the country. And Cully, firstly, obviously takes for his own wines for Porcellainberg. He's pumping water 4 kilometers up the mountain there from when we can get water from the Berg River. I mean, if you think Boekenhoutskloof, the rainfall, the 10-year average is about 2.5 meters. The average rainfall on Porcellainberg over the last 10 years has been 390 millimeters. Right. And if you consider that's an hour away, it's absolutely nothing. And then
Rosa always says it's a brutal site. I mean, but they're not brutal wines, but it is definitely a brutal site.
No, it's incredible, and the only way to prepare the soils is with a big D9 or the big tooth, is to rip these relatively sharp shale branks to allow the roots to penetrate. Cully is an incredible farmer, and then you move towards Goldmine, which is kind of 15 minutes away by car, next to the Molyneux, and still a lot of schist, but a more kind of red schist, more iron-rich in the soil, different profile to the wines, where I think Porcellainberg has this nice blue fruit profile, very, very bright, amazing acidity. Goldmine gives a plushness to the wines, a bit more. The profile tends a bit more to this kind of Christmas pudding in Syrah, which I like, particularly when it's ripe.
And I know Porcellainberg is your backbone, is it?
Absolutely. So as I was saying, Cully's got about 90 hectares there of Syrah and about 50 hectares of Goldmine. And Cully takes the first, he picks for himself, and then we pick for Boekenhoutskloof. And obviously, the reason we bought these properties was not for these brands, but more for Chocolate Block. Chocolate Block morphed to a wine of origins, Swartland from the 2015 vintage. And so all the fruit is coming from the two sites. And depending on the vintage, 18, it was, I think, 60 or 70% Porcellainberg, and the balance from Goldmine. And we obviously vinify completely differently to Cully. We're not trying to probably we should make another Porcellainberg, but with his success, but we deliberately produce the wines quite differently. These are all in concrete Nicovello tanks, and then goes down. You mentioned Foudre earlier. About 7 years ago, we kind of made a transition slowly from old barrique that we'd always used for Syrah. With Syrah, we've never used new wood. We've always seen the kind of, whether it's barrique or now Foudre, as a vehicle for slow oxidation. So now we work exclusively with Foudre from Austria, from Stockinger. And they're 2,500 liters, so larger format. And again, obviously, very, very few. Well, there's no opportunity for primary oak aromatics there.
When so the you're not using barrique at all?
No, not at all for Syrah. We are using some demi-muid, some 600 liters. I'm a big fan of Cornas. And in my last visit to Clap, I noticed some Stockinger 600, so I ordered some from the cooperage. And we work a lot. We work very closely with Stockinger, an amazing family-owned cooperage in Austria. And with the 600 liters, a lot of the Goldmine fruit actually goes in there. But so Syrah obviously, as from day one, naturally fermented. We do quite a lot of whole bunch these days. We've got lots of parcels coming in, and we, through having the Foudre, we then place all the parcels separately until the final assemblage.
Tell us a little bit more about whole bunch. Do you use whole bunches for, I mean, they're slightly counterintuitive, whole bunch, that you think because they actually increase the pH, don't they? But they give you structure. And are you doing it for structure, for perfume, for texture? I mean, you don't want to increase the pH, do you? Just tell us a little bit about how you incorporate them.
Yeah, so Tim, what we found with obviously the logic with a whole bunch is carbonic maceration, and like with gamas and things, it just gives a beautiful fruit profile and a different tannin structure. The combination obviously with whole bunch, you've obviously got the stalks there, so there is when the stalks aren't lignified and they're useful, you get a bit of tannin extraction as well. But it really gives we tend to also do a long pre-fermentation maceration. So we chill the grapes. Firstly, they come in from the Swartlands in cold trucks and reefers. We then have a cold room on the property to chill, get the grapes really cold before we bring them into the winery, either whole bunch and then also do stemming. And interestingly, in more than a decade now, we also don't crush for any of the red varieties. We destem but don't crush. So we're trying to keep the fruit as intact as possible. And that's been important. I think a lot of the problems, not problems, but the reputation of Cape wines tended to be a bit astringent, often too much tannin extraction combined with the acidification gave wines which had a reputation of being a little bit astringent and a bit harsh. So we try and remove any of those variables.
I mean, I think the evolution of Syrah in South Africa in a very short period of time is amazing. I mean, like you, I'd had some, certainly from La Motte, where Jack Bourman was making wine, but then you're 97, and we're only talking, we're talking less than 25 years. The transformation of Syrah, I think Syrah is an extremely exciting grape variety in South Africa. I mean, and not just from the Swartland either. You know, I think that the bits of Stellenbosch and even some of the cooler climate styles.
You look at Richard Kershaw.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, Rihanna did from Zoldering I think yesterday or the day before, Richard Kershaw with a clonal thing, with the Elgin Syrah. I mean, that's as interesting, you know, and those cooler climate wines tend to bring that beautiful white pepper notes. I mean, we work with a site next to Reinica where we get beautiful pepper. It's a wine that I make for the guild every year. So it's very. But what is interesting is, you know, when I produced the first Syrah nearly 25 years ago, people were really trying to mimic the South Australian style. Lots of vanillans, lots of American oak, big bold,
Barossa, sort of power,
Exactly. I mean, Peter Ferreira was doing some big stuff out of Graham Beck those years. There was a few other guys. But today, almost exclusively, people are realizing that Syrah does not want new oak. You know, Syrah, you know, other than the super oaking of Gigal, even in Cotriti, it's largely fallen away. People, you know, want to, again, use the barrique or the food rose vehicle for slow oxidation. No primary oak aromatics. You want to preserve the integrity of Syrah.
And it's interesting you mentioned Reinica, because there's that little sort of constellation around Reinica, which would be Reinica and Boschkloof and the Graft, which is Lucas van Logerenberg's wine, all come from that little pocket, really, of Stellenbosch. So Stellenbosch Syrah, I think is very exciting too, obviously. I mean, these wines are amazing. And those of you who don't know, I gave the Porcelainberg 2018 100 points for my sins. It's only the third one I've given 100 points to in South Africa. So I hope Callie got a bonus. Or at least a Christmas card.
Callie's bonus is me living in Europe and leaving him alone.
Anyway, that's fascinating insights about Syrah. I mean, I always get this impression. I know you're a great drinker of wines from around the world, that Syrah is almost your biggest love. Would that be true?
Yeah, Syrah and Piedmont. I mean,
right.
If you ask me when my last sip, it's going to be Monfortino. It's not going to be La Landau.
Okay, time for something a little sweet. We're now going to move on to the late harvest, basically. Where are we? Oops. Okay. Oops. Okay. Just tell us a little bit about this wine now.
Yeah, so this is a vineyard I planted in the late 90s, just below the winery here where I'm sitting at Boekenhoutskloof. And the idea was to make a Sauterne style sweet wine. We, as I've mentioned already, Boekenhoutskloof, very, very wet. This is on these nice loamy soils below the winery, right on the slopes of the Franschhoek River, surrounded by a whole lot of trees. So this nice bowl that gets beautiful humidity. We
and does it get the tightest every year?
Every year, yeah. I've tried in years where we struggled. I've tried to kind of spray a mist to try and encourage, but we do. Sometimes we have to wait. For example, I mean, we haven't picked yet. The bunches are all still on the vines. I got back to South Africa on Saturday and did a walk through, and we've been pelted by rain, so we've lost a lot of the good efforts. But we've got a week of sunshine now, and that botrytis will be back. But we're going to need to get it off. But we get beautiful, beautiful botrytis. And it's great for us as a winemaking team. It's a hell of a stimulating wine to make. Not very easy. I mean, anybody can make sweet wine, but to make a good one is particularly difficult. And as I say, the reference for us is very, very much Sauterne or Cadillac. And here we we've been fortunate. We get great botrytis. And then have here the cooperage. We're working with some barrels that are made specifically for sweet wine, and we give them a long élevage in 100% new oak. You'll notice that this is the current release is the 17.
Yeah.
So when we release the 18 reds, we will release the previous vintages sweet wine. And I mean, this in fact is the Platter sweet wine of the year. One of the earlier vintages was your sweet wine of the year. Yeah. So it's a wonderful one. As I say, as winemakers, it's very technical, so it's good for Godfrey rather than me. I mean, the first one I made in 2002 was a colossal disaster. It landed up. No, it was 7 grams of alcohol with 7% alcohol with 490 grams of sugar.
And what is this at? Again,
no, this is stock standard Bordeaux. This is normally between 145 and 160 grams of sugar, 12.5% alcohol, but very rewarding wine. And we make tiny. The first vineyard is 0.7 or 0.8 of a hectare, so just under 2 acres. And from it, we seldom get more than 2 or 3 barriques.
And is it a field blend again?
Yeah, so we've implanted. Initially, it was all Semillon, but what we have done is implanted as vines have died. We put in a bit of Sauvignon. We actually put in some Muscat as well, and we subsequently pulled out 2 other vineyards on each side of this block to plant more, because we enjoy this style. We don't make very much, and we've got crazy demand for it. So, but it's kind of a nice to have more than you need it in your portfolio. But I enjoy it.
Just one thing I'm interested with sweet wines. It's sometimes difficult to keep the VA, the volatile acidity, under 1. What do you do here? Because I don't find this. I like this freshness of it. It's got a little bit of VA, but way below anything that's going to bother me. What attention do you have to pay to the wine and to the grapes and to the fermentation to keep that VA low?
Yeah, really, it's about just watching it. Obviously, the condition of the fruit, so the triage is very, very important here. You've got to throw out the grey rot and separate it very, very early on. And so somebody's got their mic on here. So, Tim, can somebody turn the sound? Okay, that's better. So Tim, we firstly settle the wine properly before ferment, so get quite nice clean juice into the barrique, and then we just watch it. You really got to watch it. The minute that VA starts climbing, you've got a rack and then a rest with sulfur. But and again with Godfrey and his prowess in the cellar, he's just got better at it, and the wines are definitely better. Those earlier ones certainly had a bit more VA.
And they were a bit more marmalade-y in a way, weren't they? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But
it's interesting. That's the only wine here that was 17 vintage as opposed to 18. And 17 probably, has a pretty stellar reputation, doesn't it? I mean, along with 15, particularly for reds, I'd say.
Yeah, it's again, we were just better at handling the same conditions that we had in 16, and I think we all made better wines.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've tasted 5 pretty amazing wines. I always love the fact that you and the team are so good at so many different styles. We haven't had a chance to try the Cap Maritime wines, which is you're making wines now with Chardonnay and Pinot. We've obviously talked about the Chocolate Block, which is this multi-varietal blend. It's been fascinating chatting to you. I think we've probably got time for a few questions. If anybody wants to ask questions, I haven't looked at the chat box because I've been busy talking to Marc. I hope you've all been able to hear us. I mean, the connection has been pretty good most of the time. I think we've occasionally had a little bit of fuzziness, but I mean, that's to be understood really when we're speaking to each other across these sort of thousands of miles really, or kilometers. Any questions anybody would like to ask Marc? I think you can, if you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself and that would be great, or just do it through the chat box.
There is this question mark from Job Seuren. You know him? I don't know if Job wants to ask it himself.
Sure. Hey, Marc. I think this is the first time we tasted this vintage, maybe, but I came across a little bit more, maybe a fresher, reductive style, and I don't know if it's a vintage or that. Normally we taste it on a And normally we get a 2015 here on the market or 16. So maybe we taste it normally a little bit later than it's already. But especially the Syrah and the Stellenbosch came across much more on the fresher side than I was used to. I was wondering whether that came from where it came from. Whether the style was more modern approach now, not like completely different, but more on the fresher side, or what the reason for what was it for that?
Yep, I think it's really Godfrey, who's far smarter in the cellar than I ever was. Mine was more about feel and we just being smarter about what we do. While we haven't tried to follow the trends too much, we've acknowledged that, you know, if any of you remember my 2001 Syrah had 15% alcohol, and we've had a few other interesting things along the way. And we've just got smarter. We're picking a bit earlier, particularly with Syrah. We used to wait for O Mens Gesiggie, or old man's face, when the berry completely loses turgor. We now pick a bit earlier, so the fruit profile is a bit brighter. And again, the word you've used is a bit fresher. And that's true for the Cabernet as well as the Syrah. Just really adapting picking times and working with now vineyards that are a bit more mature and that we understand more.
Thank you. Any other questions? Silence from the Netherlands.
Silence from the Netherlands, yeah.
They're all in awe of Allison's goal yesterday. So.
Probably, yeah. Okay, no further questions then. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for this amazing tasting, for this presentation as well. I think you can notice that you know each other quite well, actually for some years, because it was difficult to come
We've drunk a lot
between
of
you.
bottles together over the years, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Tim. Lovely to see you in Holland sometime, probably.
I'd love to. Please invite me.
Okay, we will do. Good luck with your release from your Argentina report.
Thank you.
And Marc, we will see you in Holland quite soon, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for taking the time. Tim, especially to you, been a great supporter of Boekenhoutskloof. Tim was actually here when he heard that in the old days his phone beeped and he received his MW, so we go a long way back together. I remember, and obviously a few of you will know, you should really have a look at Tim's report. It's become the reference work for South African wine. Cully obviously getting the 100 points last year, but also Godfrey, South African winemaker of the year. It's become important for us, and good luck today with Argentina, Tim. I hope,
thank you, man.
I've seen some of the pre-posts. It's looking, there's a few nervous guys down there.
Okay, guys, thank you very much again. Alle gasten ook, dankjewel. Nogmaals, willen jullie iets weten over de beschikbaarheid van de wijnen? Jullie weten ons te vinden bij Pallas Wines. En bedankt voor het deelnemen.
See everyone. Bye.
Fijne dag.
Bye.
Tot ziens.
Oops. Boom.
Guys will actually see.
Huh?
Yeah.